I'll let you know when it hits and you can do the intro. All right, we're good.
All right. People just kind of funnel in a few people, hopefully. Um, just got a new computer, so I am trying to figure out how to configure my displays. I have the left on the right and the right on the left.
What's up, everyone? You got Connor and Ben here. We've been a couple of busy fellas, so we weren't able to record the podcast yet, but we figured we still love the content and the information. So we're going to come to everybody live. So special airing of Vicious Talk live on YouTube. So we hope you guys can either join in or check out the video after it ends, but before, the 1 o'clock kickoff start on the East Coast. And what time is it over there in the West Coast for you when the games kick off, Benny?
11. I'm on the mountain time at this point. Arizona is the weird state that doesn't acknowledge.
I can never keep track of your time zone, so I was like, I'm not going to look like a jackass and throw the wrong time out there completely.
Yeah, Connor, thank you. Welcome to our YouTube edition of Vicious Talk with Benny P. We, like you said, doing some Week 14 discussion. We feel bad that we weren't able to get our usual coverage out. Like you said, it's been a busy few weeks, and especially during the holidays, like just normal jobs pick up the pace, and you got a lot of things on your plate. And when you're working, well, All Things Analysis is a big passion project of ours, and we do a lot of work on it. It does take a backseat to some of the family stuff and our actual paid jobs. So
Priorities, there you go. But Sunday is for football and fantasy football. It's the last week of the NFL season for a lot of fantasy football managers out there. And that means playoffs are on the line. Roster construction is crucial today. And last minute injuries, there's a lot of guys who are on the line that may get ruled out. So it's definitely important that you're checking today. Hopefully you're on the video or you're checking your lineup before games kick off, and we can give you the latest advice.
Definitely. There were some shocking injuries that have like just kind of some major players that don't have bye weeks. Well, one, you have bye weeks of some major players, and then two, there was guys like Keenan Allen, Daryl Henderson.
Telling
Big
me.
name. There's some big names out there that aren't playing this week, aren't able to suit up, and in such a critical fantasy football week. I'm sure fantasy owners are looking for a lot of different avenues for advice on how to compensate for those losses.
Yeah, we had DeAndre Swift is out. Jamar Jefferson looks like he might be the starting running back with Jamal Williams out. COVID-19 ruled out on Friday, so make sure you get him out of your lineup. Crazy. And then I think Jonathan Taylor's on bye this week, so that's obviously he's been the best fantasy football player all season long. So to not have him in the last week of the NFL fantasy football season is just
and David Harris
horrible.
Like it seems to be. I mean, he's been a solid running back too for people. He's out this week too with the bye week. So
just the 17 game season is just something that clearly we still need to work on in terms of the bye week timing between fantasy football owners and the actual NFL season, and maybe the schedule construction.
100%. The okay, the YouTube format's funny. I'm pulling it up now on my screen, so I have a copy of our Zoom and our YouTube page here. Keeps them monitoring of the chat. If anybody has any questions for their specific start sit stuff, feel free to pop those into the chat, and Connor and I would be happy to discuss. But unless we get some more fan interaction, we can kind of just go through our normal format of the podcast. Normally we would start with our vicious players of the week, and You're Killing Me Smalls, just kind of talking about the highs and lows of the week for the NFL. Connor, do you have any guys that you were really thrilled about from last week, just kind of, or throughout the week that, you would consider your vicious player or players of the week?
Basically everybody on my fantasy football team last week.
All right, don't get too snippy with me.
I think Tom Brady with Tom Brady's performance, I think he's put himself right atop of the MVP vote right now at this point in the season. Jonathan Taylor's been outstanding. He's probably number 2 in terms of the race. Kyler coming back from injury and the Cardinals looking great. I think they're a real Super Bowl contender. So I think those would be the guys I would want to highlight.
Yeah, I mean, you can't go wrong. Those are some of the NFL's biggest stars. Tom Brady winning Sportsman of the Year by SI too. I personally, I know I'm biased. I would have given it to Shohei Ohtani, but Brady was a much deserved candidate. So I'm not going to hate on it. But I thought what Ohtani did in the baseball realm was just unprecedented, really. And when you have something so new in a sport that's over a century old, it's pretty impressive. And but his team didn't win at all, and his team didn't win really. Didn't even make the playoffs.
They didn't win much.
That's the biggest gripe. So.
Yeah. Story of being an Angels fan or a Giants fan, right?
Yeah, for sure. Vicious players of the week, though. I mean, you highlighted a lot of them. I would say what I wanted to highlight is the importance of the insurance policies that have been happening in fantasy football. You got to kick it off that conversation with Sony Michel, who stepped into Darrell Henderson's role last week and absolutely tore it up with 125 plus rushing yards, a touchdown.
Looked awesome.
25, 26 fantasy points. And Connor and I continue to talk about this throughout the year. We have been, and the importance of an insurance policy for your most valuable assets in fantasy football can't be understated. Guys who owned Dalvin Cook and had Alexander Madison were able to plug him in a few times this year. Chuba Hubbard was an all right backup to McCaffrey when he's gone out, and he's another option now going forward. Tony Pollard's been an asset in his own right, even when Zeke is playing, but he's still one of the most valuable insurance policies in football. You got the number 1 fantasy running back in the league in Derrick Henry went out, and there's been now 2. We were trying to predict that insurance policy for weeks, and it was a carousel of potential candidates, and it landed on 2 that seemed to be adequate. But like I said, it's just you have to be constantly searching for those guys to back up your most valuable assets, because it's inevitable when things go sideways. And in fantasy football, you got to be able to adjust and stay flexible, and having depth on your roster that has the potential to, your bench should always have potential to start at some point. When you have just guys on your bench that you'd never really want to start, regardless of whether or not they become the number 1 guy, or those are roster cloggers, and you don't really want those. And sometimes you got to bite the bullet and cut them. Guys like, I mean, for my personal example, I had Julio Jones on my team, and I dumped him. I can't have a Julio Jones on my roster who's just going to take up space, make me consider starting him every week, and then he's just going to have the type of output he has had all season. And I couldn't wait any longer for him to what I was hoping for him to be in the beginning of the year. You have to dump guys like that, and you have to cut bait before they hit their bottom.
Ben, let me ask you something. So I completely agree. You need to have handcuffs. So what do you do in a situation where you have the starting player and there's just an asshole in your league who has the backup to your guy and he won't trade him to you? What do you do?
You have to overpay sometimes. Connor's talking about a specific example. He was trying to get Sony Michel for me, and
about 3 weeks ago, so right before Henderson went out.
Look, I'm a smart fantasy manager, and I knew the value of Sony Michel. Connor knew the value of Sony Michel at that time. And at that time, he was offering fair value. But I knew the potential of Sony Michel was far greater than the potential value of the guys he was offering me in exchange for him. And when that's the case, you gotta hold on. You gotta know what you got. And when you have a handcuff as good as Sony Michel, he has the potential, like we saw, to be an RB1, a top 12 running back when he's starting. And when that's on your bench, and I get most weeks he's not going to be that, but we saw I got a critical win last week with riding him in 2 leagues. So when you have a guy like that on your bench, you got to make sure you know what you got. And sometimes, you run into a manager who knows his stuff, And you got to sometimes, if that's the case, you might want to overpay because look, we saw Connor you have Henderson in 2 leagues now, right? Or
Just one.
Just the
Just the
ATA
one.
league.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, I knew where you were coming from and I understood why you were trying to trade for him, but I knew Michelle was more valuable than any backup or wide receiver 3 that I could get in return for him. And when that's the case, you just got to sit tight and keep your cards in your sleeves, so to speak. Kind of like keep those chips in your back pocket.
It's an interesting concept to think that, like, I think I offered Jacoby Myers and Jeff Wilson Jr. basically. So I figured, Jeff Wilson Jr. is about equal. Probably Sony Michel's a little bit of a better back at this point in his career. And then Jacoby Myers, I was like, it's a flexible player. But Ben was saying Jacoby Myers has essentially no value to me because I'm never going to start him compared to my other wide receivers. So essentially, it's just a slight downgrade for Michel to Wilson. And I get it. And so you have to consider the potential impact. If this were to happen, XYZ, do the players in this trade actually make it into my starting roster? In the case of Jeff Wilson Jr. and Jacoby, maybe Jeff Wilson Jr. on the right week, but probably not Jacoby, and therefore it's just a downgrade for you. I get it. I tried to overpay, but I'm not going to give you a starter at the same time. So
no, understandable. And it depends on roster construction. And at this point in the season, most rosters are rounded out pretty smoothly. And if you're
if you're in playoff contention still.
Yeah, exactly. And if you have the guys you're going to start, you want depth, but you also, I mean, when you have just 4 or 5 weeks left, less than that, you have 4 weeks left on the fantasy schedule, and there's no point really to acquire a guy that is going to ride your bench the rest of the way, mostly, unless there's an injury. Because if all things bank right and you become the fantasy champion in your leagues, you got to get a little injury luck. And that's kind of the nature of fantasy football. You got to get a little lucky with the injuries. And when you have good handcuffs on your bench, that's the only way to compensate for an injury at this late stage of the game. Because you get a wide receiver 3 or a flex option on your bench. Yeah, it's nice to have the depth, but do you really need that guy? Is he raising your team's ceiling enough to get into fantasy contention? And that's not really the case. Like a guy like Michel, or if Zeke went down, you got Pollard. If Cook goes down, you got Madison. Like, those guys are league winners if the starters go down, and those guys become increasingly valuable as the season gets to the later stages.
So in terms of the backup starting today, let's tie it back to week 14. You have Sony Michel starting. Henderson's out. Who else do we have? Jamar Jefferson likely starting. Jeff Wilson Jr. likely starting, right? So between those 3 guys, are there any other ones you can think of? And then let's rank them. Let's rank the backups.
No, I think you nailed them. The ones in Detroit are the ones that are pretty difficult to pinpoint here. Yeah, did you say Jeff Wilson Jr.? He's starting today.
Yep.
And I think the ones that
a Wilson Hasty combo.
Yeah, and there's these situations that the layout of how this workload is going to be distributed is not easy to pinpoint, because in Detroit, you have Jefferson, but there's also I'm trying to look up his name because I never get it right. It's like Azubuike or Azubuike, and they're more or less projected to get about half the carries, both of them. So, if it's Detroit, it's an offense that the ceiling's already pretty severely capped. I don't know how valuable, that type of workload would be. Also, Ty Johnson for the Jets. Forgot about him. Ty Johnson, he's going to be a starter for New York, but they're facing New Orleans. So a really tough matchup. So it's push and pull with these guys. We're talking about backups and the importance of them, but then you get these types of players that their ceilings just don't really match what you're looking for in some of these guys. And I don't know. It's tough. It's tough when some of these guys go out. I mean, you got a number of backfields now just straight going to be splitting carries almost down the middle. You got Denver's backfield with Javonte and Melvin Gordon. You got
Melvin Gordon's looking like he's going to play.
Yep. And then you got San Francisco, like you said, Jeff Wilson Jr. and Jermichael Hasty. You got Seattle, Alex Collins and Rashad Penny. Detroit, Jamar Jefferson and Godwin. Igwebuike. I can't pronounce that name, but Godwin, Jamar and Godwin. And then you got Tennessee, Hilliard and Foreman. New York, I'm sure Ty Johnson's not going to be the bell cow guy there. They're probably going to mix in. I can't remember who the other guy is in that backfield today.
Kevin Coleman?
No, he's out.
Is he playing still?
He's out. There's one other player in that backfield.
LaMichael Pirine.
I think Pirine's in there.
Yeah.
Ty Johnson's not the kind of guy that is a 3-down running back. So I have a hard time projecting him as a full-time starter. You got Arizona now too. Chase Edmonds is back off IR. He'll be cutting into the workload of James Conner, who has been a fantasy monster. There's these kind of nightmare scenarios where these backups are cutting into the starters' workload pretty severely.
Between the bye week, the injuries, and then these split backfields, there's a lot of potential bombshells in week 14 that could sink a lot of people's rosters if you don't make the right decisions right now. So we're going to try to help people navigate the waves right now in this episode.
Definitely. All right, Connor, that was a long-winded vicious players of the week. Quickly, any disappointments you wanted to highlight over last week?
Maybe the Bills D.
You got to kick out
just getting beaten.
That's where I was hoping you were going.
Only 3 passes against them, to lose in that manner in your own home territory in the win where you think that, they would have an advantage. The play calling wasn't there. They didn't play well. They didn't run at all, which was weird. Josh Allen didn't run. Zach Moss and Devin Singletary completely ineffective, and they couldn't stop the Pats. You knew what the play call was going to be every single time, and yet Damian Harris and Ramondre were ripping off 4 to 5 yard runs, occasionally a 20 or 60 yard run. So I would say the Bills were. I
do not even think it's the defense that was the problem. You give up 14 points to one of the league's best teams in the Patriots. You should be able to win the football game.
Yeah.
The problem is the offense. I mean, the Bills refused to adjust on offense.
The play calling was weird.
It was horrendous last week, and it's been a snowball effect. And I kind of have these in my. We'll get to it when we talk about the Bills and Bucks game this week. One of the best games of the week. But more or less, I was listening to the Ringer Gambling Show. Warren Sharp, one of my favorite handicappers. That's his show there on the Ringer Podcast Network. He had an excellent discussion about the Bills this week, and he basically just kind of highlighted that, Buffalo looked at the Kansas City Chiefs in the same way that NBA teams look at the Golden State Warriors over the last few years. Well, before Clay got hurt and the Warriors were the team to beat, and like the Rockets and these other teams were constructing their teams to essentially beat the Warriors. And that was the goal. You got to construct your roster in the best way to beat the Warriors because they were the king of the hill. They were the team on top. And the Chiefs were similarly that same vein in the AFC. The Chiefs were the team to beat, and you got to construct your roster to beat the Chiefs. And that's what the Bills went out and did last offseason. They assembled a passing attack. They brought in Emmanuel Sanders and a lot of good pass route runners and they shored up the offensive line a little bit. They brought in some difference makers on defense, and they assembled their scheme on offense to be pass heavy and be able to compete with the Chiefs in a high scoring game. And that was the goal, making sure that your offense could keep up with those teams. And then they go out and they beat the Chiefs in week 5. And they had an impressive win against them. They had an early start to the season that was very impressive. And it seems like ever since that week 5 win, they've really kind of lost the edge to their game that was a huge identifying characteristic to their success over the last year and then in the early going in this season. And they really don't seem to have lost a lot of that kind of, it's hard to explain. It's like a oomph to their game. Just kind of, they're not really the same team anymore. And it's starting to culminate into some pretty low spots now. Last week seemed to be the low point of their season when they lost to the Patriots. That's their division rival. Now it looks like the Patriots are in the driver's seat to win that division, something that we never anticipated early going of the year in the first half of the season. And now, they come into the later stages of their season and they got a much tougher schedule than they did in the early going. And it starts with, the Pats last week, the Bucks this week. They have a gauntlet of opponents to run through now to close out this season. And they're really not getting off to a good start with this second half. And the Bills just refuse to adjust. they're on offense. They continue to have a pass heavy offense, and they don't really make adjustments to their passing schemes. And the Warren Sharp loves to talk about how Josh Allen is not running the football effectively, and that was a big aspect of his success last season. He had about 30 more rush attempts at this point in the season last year, and he's not taking open running lanes when they're available to him, and that's when he needs to be tucking the football and running, because his effectiveness as a runner is huge when he just takes the open running lane and takes off, because he is a difference maker when he starts using those legs and making that a threat in their offense.
It really makes me think of the same situation with Kyler. Like when those guys are healthy and running the ball, there's just an extra level of dynamicism that occurs with them that it just is so hard to cover. But when they become one dimensional and, you try to make Josh Allen a passer, he's still not one of the most accurate passers. He's got a great long ball and a great arm, but you take away that extra step that the defense has to take when he's going to fake a run and rolls out, and it's just, it's the same thing with Kyler. You get him out of the pocket, but when he's injured, the Cardinals are a different team. They're very one-dimensional passing the ball, and that's just not where the Bills and the Cardinals are most effective now. It looks like Kyler's healthy and Arizona's back on track. Can the Bills adjust the play calling on offense to be more dynamic and less predictable? I don't have confidence in them right now. But what's crazy is if you look at like the advanced statistics on the season, they're still one of the best teams in terms of point differential, in terms of the NFL Pythagorean expectation of wins, which is based on points scored and points given up. But a lot of that came in those first early weeks of the season. If you look at the scores recently, they're not winning by a wide margin. So I really don't think you can look at the season long statistics and say the Bills are one of the top three teams. They really aren't. I mean, they are based on record, but if you look at the second half of the season, their performances, I would not want to put any money on the Bills as a Super Bowl favorite, or a Super Bowl winner, I should say.
Yeah, there's a lot of runway to go for that, that pinnacle point of the season, the Super Bowl and the playoffs. So, the hope with the Bills is that, it's not too late for them to right the ship, but with the way things are going right now, they're really struggling to find ways to successfully move the football on offense, keep their defense engaged, and get them off the field, really, because they've been dominated, it seems like, in the last few games in the time of possession battle. And that's really not good. You don't want your defense getting worn down late in the season. Like, you need to keep them fresh and healthy. And they lost their best player on that side of the football, Tre'Davious White. Now he's out for the season, and Matt Milano is no longer he hasn't been as effective, the linebacker for them. He's a really good football player, but he hasn't been as effective as he was in the early going this year. There's just kind of a lot of things that, they're going to have to figure it out. And I think the coaching staff is capable of making these adjustments, but they've been out coached in the last few weeks, and we'll have to see if, they got to put their money where their mouth is, because they've really struggled, and they're worthy of that number one spot in our You're Killing Me Small segment. Definitely.
Yeah, I mean, they barely make our top 10 in terms of NFL power rankings at this point. But to be fair, we are kind of railing on them, but they lost to the Pats, who we do have in our top 5 at the same point. So we had to keep it in some type of perspective. They're still a really good team, and they do have, deep playoff run potential if they can get things figured out.
I agree. You're Killing Me Smalls guy, quick part of it to wrap up the segment. Zion Williamson. Zion out for the season now, it looks like, with the foot injury. They shut him down from basketball activities. And
Chunky Z.
I don't know how much to try. Like, I'm not watching every Pelicans game. I'm not like following everything is Pelicans coverage, but the posts you see about Zion and his current weight is incredibly alarming with a guy that has a foot injury. So it's tough to see, like, the worry of a potential Greg Oden situation is incredibly increasing in the back of my mind with this guy. Because if you remember, Oden was an absolute animal when he first started. Like, he was a really, really good NBA player, number one draft pick, picked over Kevin Durant, and he got hurt and he had a lot of injuries, and his body just wasn't capable of taking the NBA punishment, and turned into a career that just never took off, really. And I'm worried that might be kind of where Zion's headed, but we'll see.
the play style combined with his weight is just going to do so much wear and tear on his body when you're jumping and crashing into guys, and also you carry almost a 300-pound frame. The damage on the ligaments, the plantar fascia, the smaller bones in your foot, the same issues that Greg Oden and Yao had in the second half of his career. These are the types of issues Zion is going to run into if he keeps having these. If he can't get his weight issues under control and figure out a sleeker type of body like LeBron did in the second half of his career. He realized he couldn't carry as much weight and still be the same type of agile player and have the longevity to his career. So, if I'm Zion or if I'm on someone on Zion's team, I'm like, hey, do you think you can rap with LeBron? You both have this like crazy athletic profile. You can jump through the roof. How did LeBron sustain a 17, 18-year career? And can you take a page out of his playbook and do the same? And that's what I'm hoping Zion can learn. He's still really young, obviously a really bright future if he can get it figured out himself.
Yeah, that's a good point, because I mean, LeBron's kind of laid the template for a lot of NBA players to not only just like have longevity, but also just to come into the league with a lot more maturation and readiness to, hit the ground running when you come into the league. And I feel like that LeBron kind of started that trend in the NBA. And he's set a good example for a lot of good young players in the NBA. And Zion, like you said, needs to look at himself in the mirror and tell. At this point, I don't see how he can look himself in the mirror at the end of the day and say that he's vicious, because he has not been vicious and he's been killing us Smalls. And he is my You're Killing Me Smalls player this week for sure.
Killing me, Biggs.
All right, buddy. Let's just chat a little bit about fantasy football stuff. And I want to talk about just kind of as we head into the playoffs, what kind of strategies are you kind of trying to implement to get your team best ready and prepared for success for a playoff run? Are you stashing certain players? Are you carrying two defenses? What is your strategy to try to round out your roster to get ready for a playoff run? Assuming your team, I mean, obviously there are a lot of teams that have must-win matchups this week, and we're up against the gun. We got an hour left almost to kick off. So, you've made your moves. You're ready for week 14. Hopefully you're well prepared. Assuming you're going to make it into the playoffs, what are some things that you would suggest that teams and fantasy managers try to implement to, get ready for that postseason run?
Yeah, I mean, number one, we highlighted in the beginning of the episode, you have to have your handcuffs. You can't go into a playoff game expecting that you can find somebody off the waiver wire if you have a last-minute injury that can absolutely ruin your season. So you should have been doing that a couple of weeks ago, frankly. You also want to cut the fat off of your roster to add those handcuffs. So the guys that, you were like, oh, I'm going to hold them. They have potential. We're at the point in the season, like, move on, grab a handcuff, even if it's not your own. I'd rather have the random Sony Michel, like you said, who's probably only at 3 weeks ago, probably only 30% on this point, probably like 60, 70%. But, the guys like that who, if the person in front of them goes down, they do have starter potential. Moving forward, also, you want to consider defensive matchups over the next couple of weeks. So looking 2 weeks ahead, and go ahead and store two defenses so you don't have to worry about a waiver wire situation, a matchup situation where someone snags a defense and all of a sudden you're starting the Kansas City defense against the Tampa Bay Bucks or something stupid. So you got to look ahead, look a couple weeks ahead, be prepared, and consider the matchups. But also, you can kind of play defensively as well. Consider who your opponents may need and try and stash those players. So if there's a couple top teams and they're really not handcuffing the right guys, if the top team with Dalvin Cook isn't handcuffing Madison, just because you don't have Cook doesn't mean you shouldn't, snag Madison to prevent the other team from having him. So there's a little bit of gamesmanship going on as well.
Yeah, I like those tips. My spot that I wanted to kick off and carry one of your points here is the defensive side of the football. And I've, for a few weeks now, have begun carrying two defenses in anticipation of the week ahead. And the defense that I have stashed in both my leagues this year right now is the San Francisco 49ers. And when you look at the Niners schedule, this week they got Cincinnati. Not the worst matchup. I don't mind. I mean, they're probably maybe like 12th to 15th in my defensive rankings, if just kind of ballparking it. But next week they got Atlanta. And Atlanta, when you look at the last 4 weeks, has allowed 15.75 fantasy points to opposing defenses. And that's almost 4 points higher than the next over the last 4 weeks. The Ravens actually are the second worst offense against opposing defenses. And the Falcons, if like the Panthers this week are an excellent matchup against them for fantasy. Next week, you got the Niners. The Niners have the Falcons, and then they have the Titans. The Titans over the last 4 weeks are 5th worst offense against opposing defenses. That's an excellent matchup. And you got the Houston Texans, who are about the 10th. So the Niners have an excellent 3-week schedule for the fantasy playoffs, a defense that I've heavily targeted going into the playoffs. And in ESPN, they were available in both my leagues, and they are 62.7% rostered. A lot of teams were dropping them. You know, they had the Vikings in week 12, the Seahawks in week 13, and the Bengals in week 14. No matchups there really that are, you know, fantasy owners, unless you're, you know, I think the Seahawks matchup was actually a little bit of a sneaky play, but a lot of fantasy managers probably maybe dumped them in that kind of string of schedule. And they're definitely a defense that I would recommend going out to check to see if they're available.
I like it.
Are there any other fantasy Ds that you're considering that might be available for guys to stream?
You know, I've been very happy with the Tennessee D all year long, and they've had like 40 to 60% ownership. They're probably higher now because they get Jacksonville today. But they also have Pittsburgh and then San Francisco. So potentially, and then Miami and Houston to round out the season. So depending on how the rest of your season looks, I would be fine starting him in their next 5 matchups, frankly. So that's one of those teams that if you run into some trouble, they're 47% owned. So I would have no problem putting them on my bench.
Yeah. And really, when I look at, you know, if your league gets real deep on defenses, you might want to just go to the Falcons and see like who are they playing and can I pick up the defense that's playing against them, because the Falcons are an excellent team to start a defense against right now.
Same thing with the Giants. They have the least amount of offensive touchdowns on the season. Mike Lennon, Jake Fromm combo, or an injured Daniel Jones the rest of the season. Any combo of those starting quarterbacks, you feel great starting against.
Yeah. For the Falcons, you know, they faced the Lions in week 16. And the Lions necessarily, I probably bet they're available in your fantasy league right now. And the Lions aren't necessarily a defense that you want to go out and target. They're right now ranked 29th in fantasy this year, 1.1% rostered in ESPN. If I'm in a pinch and, you know, the defenses in my league are super deep and there's only a handful available, the Lions are probably one of them. Heading into week 14, I might go or week 15, sorry, because 16 is the matchup you want to target. They have the Cardinals in week 15. That's one I would not recommend. But 16, you got the Falcons, and I wouldn't hate that matchup. I would consider them probably a top 6 to 8 defense that week at least. And you look at the defensive performance for the Lions over the last few weeks. You know, they haven't been bad. In ESPN, they scored like 5 to 4 to 10, 7, like the last 4 weeks or so, they've been in the positive and they haven't been killing you. So the Lions are a defense that might be sneaky valuable in week 16 against the Falcons.
One to mark down for DFS lineups in the future.
For sure. That is definitely a DFS lineup I wouldn't hate playing. And then just kind of around the discussion over the last 4 weeks, you know, these are the offenses that you want to target to play against for defenses. You got the Falcons at 1, like I mentioned, and the Ravens at 2. The Saints have been horrendous. On offense. They've been allowing the 3rd most points to opposing defenses. They got the Jets this week, not necessarily the worst matchup for the Jets here. And then you got the Broncos at 4, Titans at 5, Seahawks at 6, Browns at 7, Jaguars at 8, Giants at 9, Texans at 10. Rounds out the 10 teams that I would probably consider on my radar that I want to target to play my defenses against. Assuming, you know, you got some defenses that are just, you know, plug and play for against almost any team in the NFL. I mean, assuming they're not playing like the Bucks or the Cardinals, or those are the teams I probably would avoid at all costs. But there are a handful of defenses that you just gotta plug and play and you know, just leave them alone.
Yeah.
One player that I wanted to mention as well to stash and I'm assuming he's probably available in almost every league out there, is Philip Lindsay. Philip Lindsay, Miami running back, got traded from the Texans to the Dolphins midseason. Next week, Myles Gaskin, I believe he is on COVID IR, and I believe Salvin Ahmed is also on COVID IR. And it's not safe to assume that neither is going to play next week, but you head into week 14 and you're looking for starting running backs, potential flex play. If Philip Lindsay is the only running back for the Dolphins next week, they are facing the New York Jets. That is an excellent matchup for opposing running backs. And Philip Lindsay, if he's the starting guy there, is going to be in store for definitely some flex value. And he's available in right now. He's only 9.6% roster in ESPN leagues. I can't recommend more. Going out and stashing him, trimming some of the fat off the bottom of your bench to make room for him, because I think he is a potential stash play this week. He's on a bye. He's not on people's radars for that reason. And if he's available, I would definitely recommend going out and grabbing him. Are there any other guys that you're stashing right now?
No, not really for the playoffs like Philip Lindsay style. I don't really have any good names there.
No, you're good. I wanted to take a look at Ramondre Stevenson. He's 42.5% rostered. There wasn't as much discussion about Damian Harris's potential hamstring injury last week. If Stevenson's available in your league, I would definitely consider him one of the top handcuffs in the NFL.
I mean, he's not even just a handcuff. He's basically splitting the load at this point. Yeah.
Yeah. And that 42% roster is just way too low, in my opinion. He should be in the 70s. And if Stevens is available, I would definitely stash him. Coming off the bye week, some of these guys get lost in the bye week shuffle. And, Harris, he got hurt last week. If they were playing this week, I think it's safe to assume he wouldn't be on the field if they didn't have a bye. And, the Patriots they're looking at the playoffs now. They're the number one seed in the AFC. They're trying to go lock down the number one seed. So they're not by any means going to mail it in the rest of the way. But, Stevenson is more or less probably 90% as effective as Harris, just in terms of true value on the NFL football field. And if they need to bench Harris, I don't think they hesitate to do so, because Harris is going to be needed for them in the playoffs. And Stevenson is going to be a worthy backup for him. I would definitely recommend Ramondre Stevenson in any league that he is available.
No, that's crazy. I mean, the name doesn't even come to mind because I assumed he would be 70 to 80% owned at this point. So it's crazy.
Definitely. Last guy, I kind of wanted to highlight Rex Burkhead. Burkhead, he's kind of the number one guy by default in Houston. David Johnson has been in and out of the lineup. He had an illness and a thigh injury that kept him out last week. And Burkhead, he only rushed 8 times, 30 yards, caught 1 pass, 15 yards. Kind of ho-hum performances across the way all season long. But you look at their opposing defenses the rest of the way: Seattle, Jacksonville, Chargers, Niners, Titans. You don't have to really worry so much about week 18. But, Burkhead, if you're in a pinch, it is kind of like in that same vein as like a Naheem Hines for me, or like a Tony Pollard with Zeke playing, like kind of in that's maybe not as much upside as a guy like Pollard, but you get the picture. He's kind of like, maybe if you're in a pinch, he's not the worst flex value. I don't think his floor is low. I think he has a high floor, low ceiling. So he's kind of in that mediocre ballpark range. If you suffer a late week injury, I don't hate having a guy like Burkhead on your bench right now, just to be able to throw in there in a pinch.
Yeah, no, it's not a bad idea. It's you don't feel great about it, but if he gets a touchdown, then you get your money's worth. And otherwise, 8 to 12 touches, and it's hard to necessarily find a guy last minute who can get you that.
Yeah. And aside from that, I'm sure we're missing guys. And what I would recommend is going to fantasy.nfl.com. They have a fantasy points against. You could filter by the last 4 weeks. You look at the opposing teams you want to face. You look at the running back position. The Steelers have been giving up a lot of points to opposing running backs. Go figure. You wouldn't expect that, really. The defense for the Steelers is considered to be pretty good, but the Steelers have been one of the worst defenses to opposing running backs this week. Last 4 weeks. You got the Bills up there, the Seahawks, the Raiders, the Texans, the Cardinals, go figure, the Jets, the Jaguars, the Bucks, the Chiefs. Some of these teams are not necessarily ones you would want to, attack and go after, but maybe this is an opportunity to, at the very least, throw some DFS value, be able to get off the scent of some of these, the guys in DFS that aren't going to be widely sought after because, the peripheral perception of some of these offenses and the defenses are ones you want to avoid. And that might not necessarily be the case, especially with the Bills this week. The Bills, I think, are like, when you look at the overall season numbers, like 7th best defense against opposing running backs, I think, overall. But when you look at the last few weeks, they've been really dominated by some power runners. I think it opens up the window for a really good value play with Leonard Fournette, foreshadowing to our DFS lineups. I think Fournette could be a sneaky great play in DFS this week.
I think a lot of people will be off of Fournette too because they see that red, first against the run next to his name, and they're not considering where the team stands now. And that's what we were highlighting about the Bills before, is that they're not the team right now that we've seen earlier in the season that was putting up huge point totals and forcing other teams to pass the ball to catch up. So you can run on them, and they're not really going to outpace you through the air where you can't continue to run on them throughout the game. But also Leonard Fournette leads the league in receptions this year from the running back position. So you also have that factor where he's not going to get phased out. He is the pass catching back in Tampa Bay if it does turn into a shootout. So regular season Lenny, he's a thing now, top 10 running back.
Yeah. One of the biggest misses I had on the season was Fournette. I was not high on him. I was actually a little bit higher on the value just for the buy low potential of a guy like Ronald Jones. Really missed the boat there. Jones has been practically irrelevant, and Fournette's been the guy there 100%. So kudos to Lenny Fournette, and the Bucs are really riding him, and the Bucs offense has just been awesome the last few weeks, and they really seem to be hitting their stride late in the season.
Yep.
All right, Connor, let's talk about some of the movement we've seen in our power rankings this week. You highlighted some of the teams we've moved up, the Seahawks, the Rams. I moved the Seahawks up. The thought was, a lot of the teams that they're ranked around, honestly, just I almost cross off at this point. I'm crossing off the Saints. I'm having the Seahawks over them. The Dolphins, the Dolphins actually moved up a few spots, but their ceiling is just not there. They don't have the talent, and I just don't see how they could be considered a top 20 team or a playoff team. Really is what you're looking at there. And, the Raiders, they've really been dropping. Like, I don't know what they do. I don't know what they do good at this point in the season. The Raiders have been really struggling. The Giants, they have a really horrendous quarterback situation. The Broncos last week really showed you who they were. The Broncos just have no upside on the offensive side of the football, aside from Javonte Williams, because I just don't think Teddy Bridgewater is the quarterback to open up the potential of any of those pass catchers in that offense.
Cancels out Cortland Sutton. He cancels out Jerry Jeudy, unfortunately. I thought he was going to be an upgrade. I still think he was better than Drew Lock, but quarterback situation there is very poor as well.
Yeah. I watched almost that whole game. I watched that whole game between the Chiefs and the Broncos, and I could not tell you how frustrated I was with Bridgewater last week. I was on the Denver plus 9.5, and I had the under, and I nailed the under. And that was actually my best bet of that game. But I parlayed it as well with the Denver plus 9.5. And really, they should have covered. They should have. They had like that drive in the first quarter that was like 14 minutes. And then they turned it over on downs in the red zone. I could not believe they just take the points, man. Just take the points. And they really killed me last week. And Bridgewater was the main culprit to that struggle. He has no X factor. He has no special talents. He's just so bland. He's like a frozen TV dinner. He's just so bland. And you get your nutrients from that. Like you microwave your TV dinner, you get the Salisbury steak. Yeah, you get some mushrooms in there. Like
chewy.
It's chewy. Like you have a hard time getting it down, but at the end of the day, you got your nutrients, you ate your vegetables, you got your broccoli and carrots in there, and it got the job done. But really, did you enjoy yourself while you did it? You definitely did not. And that's what Bridgewater is right now. He's just a microwave TV dinner. and he's just really struggling to create any sort of. He has no spice. He has no sauce. He has nothing to add to the
No
meal
A1
there. No A1 sauce there. And Bridgewater's really killing the Broncos offense. Seems like ultimately they're a quarterback away from a playoff team,
relevancy. Yeah,
possible contender. You put Aaron Rodgers on that team. I mean, are we talking about them as potential Super Bowl contenders? It's
100%.
possible. It's possible.
I mean, they don't have Devontae Adams, but the combination of Cortland Sutton and Jerry Judy might make up for that. And Tim Patrick's no
Fant's
slouch,
a better tight end
no
than
slouch.
anybody on the Packers right now, too.
Agreed. All 4 of those pass catchers are very, very solid. It's a great trio. So if you get the right quarterback in there, you get Deshaun Watson, something happens with his legal situation, he's able to play next year.
I would love that.
They could be a dangerous team.
Yeah.
But not this year.
Yeah.
I'd avoid Tim Patrick. I'd avoid Cortland Sutton. Sutton's getting dropped. It's like 5 weeks in a row where he's done nothing.
Ever since Judy came back, Sutton just can't get any sort of consistency.
Yep. And Judy doesn't seem more than like a flex play right now.
He's just like a flyer. You hope that he catches one and just takes it to the house. And
he's such a good route runner, so athletic, great with the ball in his hands. But people are honing in on the fact that Teddy B can't throw the deep ball. So
yeah, and it's kind of depressing because he actually came out early in the season and showed that he was capable of throwing the deep ball at least a little bit, and they were trying to embrace it. But the inaccuracy he's had over the last few weeks has been really bad throwing the deep pass.
He always seems to be injured every time I watch the Broncos play, at least the second half of the season too. He's doing the old man jog where he's using his shoulder to be able to pick up his legs, essentially. Like, he does not look good out there. He's always like leaning to one side. He's always got a limp. He stays in these games and he's playing, but it's kind of like Stafford recently too, where something looks off though. You can tell he's not fully there.
Yeah. I'm trying to look up deep pass ratings over the last, this is the full season. Obviously, number one, pretty predictable, Tom Brady. Brady's been an absolute monster. If you read my column on, I think it was last week or the week before, I think it was last week, I mentioned, Brady was plus 300 in the MVP voting. And obviously that's not necessarily the juiciest of values, but now he's like plus 150. It's almost a lock at this point. I went and it's depressing when you look back at your MVP bets, like as early, like I put some MVP bets before the season. I had like some Russell Wilson juice in there. I had a Josh Allen one. I had
a Joey B one.
Those ones, it's kind of depressing when you look back. But then you go at this point in the season, and it's virtually a lock that Brady gets the MVP now, and you got to bite the bullet and just get your money back. I put a little money on Brady to win it at plus 300. I thought that was the last opportunity for value on him. And It seems like I was right because he had a great week against, I think it was the Falcons last week, right? And at this point, there's no value in that. You missed the window, and Brady
368-4 last week.
Yeah, he's been excellent. The deep pass. Getting back to this though, you got Kyler, Cousins, Allen, Herbert, Ryan. Matt Ryan's kind of a surprising one up there. Prescott, and we were talking about Teddy B on the season. He is all the way down at 32nd in deep ball passer rating, or this is PFF's pass rating. And over the last, I wanted to break it down over the last 5 weeks. So weeks 13, 12, 11, 10, 9. Teddy B he's 18th. So actually a little bit better than the overall numbers, but man, Teddy B's just been really, really struggling. I think if you take away, what week did they face the Cowboys? I think if you take that week away, he's got to be almost last. I think it was week 11 they faced the Cowboys, right?
And I'm going to do a quick bathroom break, so my wife is going to fill in for me. So, Demi, come on, we're on live YouTube. she's giving me the finger over there. She's like, what the hell is wrong with you? I'll be right back, though. She won't hop on for the rest.
All right, no worries. Okay, well, I'll roll into some of the matchups we want to highlight here for the heading into week 14. Let's kick it off with the AFC West division matchup between the Raiders and the Chiefs. A really good matchup here. And the question is whether or not the Raiders have any juice left in them. And they've really been struggling over the last few weeks. And the Chiefs, are trending in the opposite direction. You know, over the last 5 to 6 matchups between these two teams, you know, the point totals have gone under. So that's kind of where I lean in this game. Aside from, you know, I'm not really, if I have to pick a side, you know, I'll preface it by I kind of lean the Chiefs direction. But with the 10-point spread and the fact that I'm pretty firm on the under 47.5, it makes it for a difficult window for, you know, the Raiders. I mean, for the Chiefs to cover that full spread. And what I'm really projecting is an absolute domination by the Chiefs here. And I think this is the week that we finally start. Well, it's not finally, because we have been for the last weeks. It's been an ongoing development. But the Chiefs are one of the scariest teams, if not the scariest team in the AFC. And the Raiders at plus 10 is just tough to get there because you don't really see what they do well. And then have, again, no Darren Waller this week. He's their most threatening and effective offensive weapon. And the Chiefs defense over the last 5 weeks ranks third in EPA per play allowed. The defense is turning the corner. And then on the contrary, on the opposite side of the football, the Raiders defense ranks 31st in EPA per play allowed over the last 5 weeks. Again, two teams trending in complete opposite directions. The Raiders were a defense that came into the year and surprised a lot of people. Max Crosby, Yannick Ngakoue really surprised a lot of people in the early going. And reality's kind of set in with them. They really just don't have the juice to continue to compete that underdog story with them. And, you know, when you look at the way this spread and the point total maps out, I lean under, but that doesn't necessarily think that I just don't think the Raiders have really anything to get jazzed up about in this game. I think the Chiefs are going to dominate them. And it's hard to see where the Raiders find any value because, I mean, the Chiefs dominate every facet of this matchup. What I don't know what the Raiders, Connor's come back from the bathroom. I'll talk about the Chiefs and the Raiders, and I'm trying to talk myself into seeing any sort of value with the Raiders, and I just can't find it. The Raiders defense has been absolutely horrendous over the last 5 weeks. I mentioned they're 31st in EPA per play allowed. And then the Chiefs defense, that was, you know, their weak link, their biggest struggle over in the early going of the season has been turning a corner over the last 5 weeks. They're third in EPA per play allowed over the last 5 weeks. And so I just don't really see how the Raiders compete in this matchup. And the only reason why you would be on the Raiders in this game is, you know, a divisional matchup, a late season matchup. Oftentimes these types of games trend to go more towards the under and a closer finish score, but ending score. But I don't see it. I don't see where the Raiders find value in this game.
I mean, these teams have played each other a couple of weeks ago, and we see the roadmap for how the Chiefs just can absolutely demolish the Raiders. Tyreek Hill went crazy. There's no Darren Waller. So it's going to be tough for the Raiders to move the ball. Obviously, no Henry Ruggs, too. So that's been a large impact on their offense, the ability to stretch the field. You know, they got rid of Nelson Aguilar last year. After last year, he had a great season. And so they're really missing that next level ability to open up the running game, too, without the field stretcher. So, and Waller himself is a field stretcher because of his athletic abilities. Yeah. So, you know, Foster Moreau is filling in there. You have Zay Jones now, and it's just making it a lot tougher for Derek Carr to be able to move the ball. He got off to a really strong start to the season, so you kind of feel bad for him. But this is what we see from the Raiders. They start off hot. They've done it a few times, and then they seem to kind of fall off. And, you know, they lost their head coach mid-season. They lost a few players. Like, it's a mess, and I don't know how they move on and beat the Chiefs today. I just don't see that as a possibility.
Yeah, I'm with you there. And really, the double-digit spread makes me hesitant because of the fact that I'm so firmly, like, under 47.5 was one of my favorite bets of the week this week in this game. And with that said, it's going to make it difficult for the Chiefs to cover a double-digit spread. But my thought is, I think they dominate the game. I think they cover, but really it comes down to if you're going to put money on this game, I probably would stay away from betting the spread. Maybe if anything, find an alternate spread, parlay it with, you know, get the Chiefs down to below a touchdown, 6.5, take the under 47.5, and you probably get a little bit of juice on that. You probably were in a plus 150 range, maybe plus 200. if you get a generous FanDuel book or something like that. But I really love the under on this game. Just overall in the season, you look at the over-unders on the year, and the unders have been absolutely booming this year. On non-overtime games, we've had 15 overtime games. Obviously, overtime, most overs are going to hit. But non-overtime games, I have gone under 59.8% of the time. Almost 60% of the games are going under on the season. And then, like I said, on the kickoff of this matchup, 5 of the last 6 matchups between these two teams specifically have gone under. Typically, these are offenses that are perceived to be, in the public eye as, high-flying, high-scoring offenses. It hasn't necessarily been the case this year, especially with the Chiefs. The Chiefs offense is considered to be one of the best in the league. Not necessarily the case this year. And I think that, the public is still kind of getting that you're trying to adjust to that evaluation, but it's kind of the truth with the Chiefs. They're a little bit of a different style team that we've seen in the last few years. And under 47.5 is one of my biggest locks of the week.
Yeah, they have a healthy Clyde Edwards-Helaire back this week as well. So I think they will like to establish the running game more. Darrell Williams has been fine. And so, they to open up the passing game, which they want to do with Tyreek Hill, he hasn't been quite the same type of player. Same thing with Kelsey in previous seasons. And I think a lot of that stems from the ineffective running game. So if Clyde Edwards-Helaire can get, the ball moving a little bit on the ground, you might see some more play actions, a couple of deep bombs. And that's what we saw a few weeks ago against the Raiders. So I think they could certainly have the potential to break it open, but they don't necessarily throw the ball deep as often anymore. So I don't mind the under as well. The Chiefs defense has been playing fantastic. The second half of the season, they've been one of the best. So they can certainly shut down what is a less than fully healthy Raiders offense.
Agreed. All right, Connor, let's roll into another matchup here. One matchup that I've had on my radar throughout the week, and one that I've actually kind of reversed fields on in my handicapping, the San Francisco 49ers taking on the Cincinnati Bengals in Cincy. I think the spread's up to 2.5 now, or maybe -2, I think it is, for the San Francisco 49ers. The over-under point total, I believe, is at 48.5. And initially, when I went into this handicap and this game evaluation, I didn't really understand the spread. It seemed like the Bengals last week had some really unfortunate circumstances that led to that, that final score that seemed like it was a blowout, a lot closer game than you might have anticipated against the Chargers. The Bengals are a team that was playing pretty well heading into that game against LA. And the Bengals just seem to be right there with the Niners, and to be home underdogs. It's a 49ers team that lost to Seattle last week, and a 49ers team that just the offenses that can't seem to, get any sort of momentum. Jimmy G's been, to say inconsistent is generous. He's been up and down all year, more down than up. But when I dug into the deeper metrics of this game, we try to pride ourselves at ATA as being a stat forward, a stat centric, advanced stat website, advanced stat team. We value those heavily. San Francisco dominates this matchup in the advanced statistic realm. They're 7th in DVOA. The Bengals are 19th. The Niners are 3rd in rush DVOA, and they're 6th in EPA per allowed on rushes over the last 5 weeks. And, the Bengals have turned into a rush heavy team. And that's not necessarily what we anticipate heading into the year. Joe Burrow was, I think, the most pass heavy quarterback when he was on the field last year. And we anticipated that kind of being the case again here in 2021, 22. And that's not necessarily the case here. And I think that, with the Niners being a run defense that is one of the best the Bengals have faced all season, it's going to be the game's going to be put in the hands of Joe Burrow. And we saw last week, Burrows might not be 100%. We saw that hand injury. It was ballooned up like an absolute, he had so much swelling in that hand. It was incredibly noticeable. When that happened, he became very inaccurate. And I just have a hard time seeing how Burrow is going to carry this offense to a victory. Temperatures are projected to be around low 40s. It's going to be cold in Cincy. well, you would think that doesn't bode well for an not LA, but a California team in the San Francisco 49ers. I think it's even worse for the Bengals here because Burrow with that hand injury is going to have a hard time gripping that football. If there was, FanDuel doesn't put up props for, Will Burrow, how many interceptions he's going to have on this game. I actually would probably say over on 1.5 interceptions for Joe Burrow in this game. I think he's going to turn the ball over, with such cold temperatures. Jeff Wilson Jr. and Jermichael Hasty, I think, are more than capable of leading that backfield for the Niners. I don't love how banged up San Fran is, but they do get Debo back. They get Jeff Wilson back. They get Fred Warner back. Plus Kittle found his groove last week, looked really good against the Seattle Seahawks. You look at that Seahawks game, they lost to a team that probably is pretty disappointing, the Niners, that is. And you look at how that game played out. The Seahawks brought out all the stops with them. They had the fake punt. They had a lot of just gambles on offense, and the Niners were right there at the end of the game. Really just needed one big play from Jimmy G. Couldn't get it, but I think that, that loss to the Seahawks is more damaging to the Niners than we might anticipate. Well, it is less damaging than we might, the peripherals might seem. And, that's a divisional matchup. The Niners, the Seahawks, that was like their Super Bowl of the season. The Seahawks they're not making the playoffs. It seems like they're on a train track to a divorce between Pete Carroll and Russell Wilson. Possible both, if not one, will be gone in this offseason. That was the pinnacle of their season last year. That was a must-win matchup to save the morale of their year. And the Seahawks pulled out all the stops and they beat the Niners. And this is a great bounce back opportunity for San Fran. Again, San Fran just advanced stat darlings, and that's what we pride ourselves here at ATA. I know the Bengals are kind of a public, or at least a sharp favorite here. I think I've seen a lot of people on the Bengals this week. I'm leaning Niners. I think the Niners -2 is one of my favorite bets of the week.
Yeah, and you can see on the show doc, I'm on the other side of the ball, so I'd happily defend my pick here in going against San Francisco and with Cincinnati. We have Joe Mixon should be playing today, so that should take some of the workload off of Joey B. T. Higgins has absolutely exploded the last 2 weeks, which I really think helps open up the offense. I think we see a Jamar Chase resurgence game. I think he's able to break a couple loose now that T. Higgins has shown to be a threat, and other teams can't really just say we're going to lock down Jamar Chase and this team can't beat us. There's enough playmakers on the Cincinnati offense where it can make up for the fact that Joey B has a hand issue. And, you talk about San Francisco and their ability to run the ball. Well, Jeff Wilson Jr., from my perspective, has been less than capable of handling it as his fantasy manager. I think he went like 19 for 50 in his starting opportunity. Jermichael Hasty's fine as a running back on third downs, but he's nothing special either. So I think that a lot of what this game hinges upon is Debo's ability to be that dual function wide receiver running back, because I think he will need to supplement the running game for San Francisco to be successful, especially in these cold temperatures. And I worry about his groin injury. You really don't want, you're talking about Joey B's hand issue in the cold, which is very valid. And I think it's just as valid talking about Debo Samuel's injured groin. He was questionable all week, limited practices. So to have him go out there in cold weather, which makes it very difficult on the muscles, they're less pliable, obviously, it makes it much more likely he can re-injure that. So Debo Samuel is certainly a player who has an injury history as well. So if you talk about, the potential for Debo not to be fully there, I think San Francisco could struggle on offense. And if you're talking about Jimmy G with a less than fully healthy crew, I would lean on the Joey B side in the Cincinnati Bengals.
Yeah, and you're a guy that just goes based off the quarterback. You love the quarterback matchups. You almost always will go with the better quarterback. And I don't think that's the case here in this one. Burrow hasn't been the guy that we expect him to be over the last few weeks. He's been a little bit underwhelming, in my opinion. And you look at the offensive performances of these two teams over the last 3 weeks. The Niners on offense are third EPA per play. The Bengals are 16th on offense. The Niners have been surprisingly decent on the offensive side of the football. with Fred Warner back on their defense, I think that he's going to cause a little bit more trouble for the Bengals. Like I said, the Niners' defensive strength is the run defense. I think Mixon's going to have a hard time finding a lot of running room, and I see this game is going in the Niners' way. And I think what's most indicative is it seems like the public is with you. I think that the Bengals are the sneaky pick here for a lot of public perception, but that line hasn't moved. In fact, it's actually moved towards Niners -2. I think it was opened up at -1.5. I think it's up to -2 now. And with that line movement, it seems kind of sneaky that, it hasn't moved in the Bengals direction. And I feel like there's something we're missing here. And I just think it's kind of, I have a hard time seeing how the Bengals, the strengths of the Niners match up well against the weaknesses of the Bengals, in my opinion. So I think this is just a game that we're going to see that the advanced stats play out. Niners, like I said, advanced stat darlings here, and the Bengals are not. So I'm gonna go with my gut here. I think, initially, like I said, I liked the Bengals having to match up. I think the peripherals, if you're just kind of watching games, the eye test might suggest, the Bengals might be looking like a better team. But I think the Niners, and the underlying, when you dig deeper into the numbers, are a better matchup here. A really good team that has been one of our biggest underwhelming or disappointing teams in our Pythagorean theorem model. And I think that the Niners are a team that could continue to improve as the season projects. Gets later to the later rounds of the year. So I think I'm pretty comfortable with the Niners -2.
Yeah, that's interesting. So you mentioned the Pythagorean win expectation, which is on the tools section of our website. So if I'm looking at the Pythagorean win expectation for the Bengals, they're at 7.3 and they're at 7 actual wins. So it shows that they're, winning the games that they should approximately. And then if we're looking at the 49ers, they're at 6.5. So, that was in there at 6 wins. So realistically, both teams their records pretty well reflect the strength of their rosters and their teams. So, it should be a really fair matchup. The line is in a good spot. So yeah, it's going to be a great game. It's a toss up, and you can see why we're pretty divided on this one.
Gotcha.
In this prediction.
I hate to badmouth our stuff, but I think the better model here for estimated wins. Pythagorean theorem is a decent launching point, but I think that Football Outsiders is obviously digging into some more advanced statistics than us. They got the bigger team. They've been doing it longer. They have an estimated wins column in their DVOA rankings. The Niners are 7th in estimated wins. They're projected to have 8.5 wins on the year. Like I said, they only have 6, and that's 2.5 different. You look at the Bengals on this model for them. The Bengals have a 6.3 projected estimated wins. They have 7. Like you said, it's similarly kind of in that ballpark, but the Niners are a team that the advanced stats really suggest that they should be a better team than what we're seeing. And, it's possible.
Loves them.
It's possible that, Jimmy G is kind of their backbone that isn't there. It might be just kind of the underwhelming factor that might be keeping them down. And I think that's probably the case. But in this matchup against the Bengals defense has not been what we thought they were early in the year. They've been, one of the weaker defenses over the last several weeks. And I just don't think that Jimmy G is going to have the most difficult time moving the football against them. And I'm pretty comfortable with that Niners -2. I think that's one of my better bets of the week. All right. Do you have a preference on where we go from here? Do you have any matchups you want to highlight?
No preferences. I'm happy to keep doing matchups. I'm happy to jump into some DFS relevance, whatever the host says.
All right. Last matchup here, then we'll highlight. This is the one we got to talk about: the Bills and the Bucks. This is the matchup. This is the game of the week. Aside from maybe if we have time, we could talk about the Rams and the Cardinals. I
was just gonna say, yeah. There's another one, but two teams clearly trending in different directions in both of these matchups, I would say.
Yeah, and with I like to look at overall trends on the year, and road underdogs have been covering against the spread more than 60% of games this season. I went into this handicap with that in mind, thinking that I wanted to give the Bills, the best chance possible to convince me how they plan to beat the Bucks in this game. And ultimately it just came down to, it's going to be very difficult for the Bills to bounce back against possibly, the NFC's hottest team right now. The Bucks have been almost practically unbeatable over the last several weeks. And, the Cardinals and the Bucks are right there, one neck and neck for 1A and 1B. But, like I said, Warren Sharp really has me convinced that the Bills are just not operating at full capacity. That Ringer Gambling Show podcast, one of my most informative, my most favorite informative podcasts to listen to for gambling advice, for advanced statistic advice. Warren Sharp is up there atop, the list of my favorite handicappers. And I really listen to what he says. And really, when he breaks down the fact that Josh Allen's not running the football at his fullest capacity, that's what it comes down to. Because I thought last week, if we were going to start seeing them do that, if we were going to start to see the Bills, embrace one of their biggest strengths on the offensive side, their quarterback, who is possibly the most dynamic, if not, top 5 dynamic quarterback in the NFL, they're not really, busting them out the way that they should and they could. And if Allen's not going to embrace that side of his game, I don't see how they unlock enough offensive ability to defend this or keep up with this Bucks offense that is operating at full capacity. It seems like, they get Gronk back. Gronk's been, top 3 tight end on the season when he's playing. He's been unbelievable.
He did like 8 for 123 a week or two ago.
He's ridiculous.
When he's actually playing.
Yeah. And then you get Mike Evans and Chris Godwin with no Tre'Davious White. I mean, it's like going to be whack-a-mole. You're going to have to double one of them, and then the other one's going to be open. And the Bucks offense has proven this year that when you take away one weapon, they're happy to go to the next one. They have so many weapons in the passing game that they don't care if you're going to try to take away one thing. They'll just go to the next option. They got 3-4 options every game that they could go to. And Brady's such a savant in the way that he analyzes opposing defenses that he moves down his reads and his options and progressions so fast. And it doesn't matter what you try to do against them. They're going to adjust and they're going to dominate you on defense. When you don't have your top cover corner, like White in this game, if Tre'Davious White was playing, he would be covering Mike Evans every play probably. He would probably take out Mike Evans as best as possible one-on-one in almost every play. And that would leave, the opportunity to double Chris Godwin, maybe double Gronk in the red zone. That would kind of leave those windows open. And without White, man, you don't have the options to cover enough. Like, you don't have the weapons to cover enough guys. They can't do it. I just don't see how the Bills defense keeps up with this Bucks offense. And I just, White's absence was not felt last week against the Patriots because of the fact they only threw the football 3 times. This is going to be the week that we feel it. The Bucks are really going to dominate them in the passing game. And then, like I said, Fournette kind of fits that mold of the power rusher that has really given the Bills rush defense a lot of trouble this year. I mean, we saw Derrick Henry started off earlier in the season. He absolutely ran all over the Bills. We saw Jonathan Taylor do something similar. We saw Damian Harris and Ramondre Stevenson last week. Like, these power rushers with a good offensive line have been really giving the Bills defense a lot of trouble. And the Bucks are my best bet of the week for these reasons. I just don't see how we get to the Bills winning this football game unless we see a major turnaround. And if we didn't see it last week against the Patriots, your divisional rival in a must-win situation, because that was their last home game against the Patriots. They're going to be on the road against the Pats, I think, in 2 weeks now. And if you're not going to win that football game, if you're not going to unlock some sort of metamorphosis, if you're not going to make any adjustments on the offensive side, I don't think we're ever going to see it, or at least it's going to be, like pulling pins or like just pulling hairs out, trying to, get them to make some adjustments. It's not going to happen.
I'd also really briefly like to apologize to anyone watching on live. We should have put up like a sensitive content warning because Ben's thumb just shooting in the wrong direction when he was counting off those wins in the games played. Holy crap, Benny. Let's see that thumb again, man.
I got 2 of them.
Oh, baby, man. Look at that right angle coming off of that.
The hitchhiker thumb. It's not like a genetic. I think it's like a genetic thing. Like
it's something. You're just like a more natural selection, more advanced there.
I wish it helped me in baseball more. Like, could have like
throw a curveball.
Yeah.
But yeah, I see it the same way. I think the Bucks are going to be the winners and victorious in this matchup. the Bills just clearly going in the wrong direction compared to the Bucs. And this team really seems to be putting it together. They finally have moved on from the Antonio Brown drama, and they've just been playing their game. They haven't lost a step at all while losing him. Tyler Johnson, Scotty Miller, Rashad Perriman's out there on the field in the 3 wide receiver sets. And those guys, they're fine wide receiver 3s. They can get the job done. It's not Antonio Brown, but literally the Bucs offense hasn't lost a step. Meanwhile, the Bills, like, when was the last time Emmanuel Sanders had a good game? Cole Beasley is like 25% of the time he might get 6 targets or 6 catches for 60 yards. The secondary weapons on the Bills offense just are not performing. It's really Stephon Diggs, and occasionally Dawson Knox will play well, but outside of that, the running backs, they're not as effective. The wide receivers are not as effective as the Bucs. Obviously, a quarterback, we like Brady over Allen at this point, just the way that they're playing. And then defensively, I have more confidence in the Bucs defense than the Bills defense, especially you highlighting that Tre'Davious White's out. And so I frankly, the 3-point line, this is one of my best bets, being on the Bucs side of the ball.
Yeah, I think we're on a lot of, this is kind of the public side, and I think the line's actually dipped down to 3.5. And so I liked it at 3. I still kind of like it at 3.5. I think that the Bucs really just handle their business here. And if they don't, it's really just going to be it's going to come down to the Bucs kind of having an underwhelming game. They're just not going to bring their A game if that's the case, because
one of those weird Brady 3-pick games because the wide receiver had a tip pass. It's the same recipe for how the Chiefs can possibly lose. Like, it has to be some bad mistakes. But I mean, I'm fine parlaying them together, just both of them to win, and you probably get plus odds. And the Chiefs and the Bucs, that is.
Yeah, I'm trying to look up. So how I mentioned a few, several minutes ago. I was looking at deep passing stats for the league, and Brady's number 1 in deep balls. I was trying to look up the explosive stats for defenses, explosive pass rates, and the Bills are actually number 1 in preventing explosive pass plays on the season. But when you look at the last 4 weeks, they are, creeping towards the top, or creeping towards the middle. They've been allowing more deep balls. You take away week 13, trying to sort some stats on the fly here. I'll take away week 13 because that was, no passing in that game whatsoever. I'll take weeks 8 through 12. These are really this is probably the best benchmark for defensive performance we've seen from the Bills. They're still, only 11 explosive pass plays allowed. They rank 13th in terms of explosive pass plays allowed. So it might be, a lot of Lenny Fournette. I think that's kind of where I lean in this game. While I think the passing game for the Bucs is going to be as effective as it wants to be, I think ultimately it comes down to the most effective weapon here for the Bucs is going to be the running game and Leonard Fournette. And I really like his over. I think his over on his rushing yards is like 70. That's kind of where I land on that. So I think that's kind of going to be the formula for success here. And if that's the case, you look at the over under on this game, 53.5, I kind of lean towards the under on that.
Yeah. So by the way, we hit 12:35. So we now have the early game actives and inactives. So I can go through that really quickly. Looking at the impacts, David Njoku officially out. Anthony Schwartz also officially out. So Jarvis Landry, Donovan Peoples-Jones, Austin Hooper, a little bit of an upgrade. Tony Pollard's an inactive. So Ezekiel Elliott will be getting the entire workload. He's still injured, so it's hard to recommend him. Zeke's not been looking fully healthy, but maybe a little bit more value now that Pollard's out. Davis Mills will be starting instead of Tyrod Taylor. So whoever's playing Houston, give that defense a couple extra points. David Johnson also out. So Rex Burkhead, that little plug and play you mentioned earlier, could definitely be potentially a good play today. Darren Waller officially out. So Foster Moreau. Mark Ingram is not playing today. So Alvin Kamara will get everything essentially. Also should mention Alvin Kamara in. Going down the list, Elijah Moore is out today. So Jamison Crowder should be highly targeted. Corey Davis is also out, so he's a good value. If you're looking for a guy to fill in, Jamison Crowder could definitely be there. Adrian Peterson is not playing, so Alex Collins and Penny getting all the carries. Julio Jones is active. He just activated off of IR, and he's going to play today. And then J.D. McKissick is also inactive again. So Antonio Gibson is another smash play in DFS. Curtis Samuel active. Don't really care too much about that. But yeah, those are the early game inactives, inactives.
I'm looking at Twitter right now too. Shout out to Adam Schefter likes to dig deep in some of these suggestions he makes. He's going to start running back Craig Reynolds for the Detroit Lions this week. That Lions backfield, like we said, I'm staying away 100% from that Lions backfield. It's impossible to know where they're going with this, but Schefter is as inside as it gets in terms of inside information.
So he's recommending him over Jamar Jefferson.
He is. Ooh. So Craig Reynolds, someone to keep an eye on, maybe a DFS value. I'm sure he's like dirt cheap, so might be worth throwing in a quick DFS lineup with him in your flex. I'm sure he's going to be like 1% rostered at best. So maybe something to take a look at there.
Yeah, really interesting one.
All right. Do you want to transition to some DFS stuff here?
Yeah, let's do that. I think the Cardinals game and the Rams game is very similar to what we were talking about with just the Bucks and the Bills. Just that the Cardinals trending up, Rams trending down. Rams look a little bit injured. Their offense is kind of in a disarray with injuries as well. So it's going to be tough to see how they're going to be able to keep up with the Cardinals in that matchup. But
yeah,
I don't know if you want to touch on that very briefly and then
sure.
Hop into DFS.
Yeah. With Kyler returning last week, I was majorly impressed with how well the Cardinals performed. And I think they're really solidifying themselves as one of the most elite teams in the NFL. We still have them at number 1 in our power rankings. I think it's the longest streak we've had at the same team at number 1 on the season. It's got to be like the 4th or 5th week at least with them at that top spot in our rankings. Over the last
love that consistency. I love that.
Over the last 6 weeks too, we look at the Rams. Stafford, when you combine completion percentage over expected, CPOE, NFL Next Gen Stat, and then you combine that with EPA per play to make a kind of composite ranking here. Stafford is 30th in the league amongst qualifying quarterbacks. I think he ranks better than just like Trevor Siemian and Trevor Lawrence and maybe Zach Wilson. I think that's what it was. Stafford has just been really bad the last few
weeks. Group of names. Oh right? My God, that's group of names.
That's 6 weeks that we're seeing a really just down play from Stafford. And it's not really showing up in the fantasy stats. He's still one of the league's top, fantasy producers, but he's starting to creep more towards the bottom of the quarterback one, threshold. And he's just not right. He has that back injury that we talked about a few weeks ago, and this is going to be a huge test for him. Cardinals defense is second in EPA per play allowed this year. The defense for the Cards has been their saving grace. I mean, Kyler, is their best player, but really the defense has been their backbone and what's been keeping them so consistently excellent week in and week out. And the fact that, Kyler came into his first game back last week, missing extended absence, a few weeks missed for that shoulder injury. And he had, a ankle injury, or he had another leg injury as well, I think. Typically, the stats on quarterbacks coming back their first game back after an extended absence, not great. The stats tell us that, it takes a while to shake off the rust. And Kyler,
think about Russell Wilson, right? Took him a couple of weeks after that finger injury.
Sure.
Looked horrible.
Great example. And Kyler comes in and he leads the Cardinals pass. The Bears are not necessarily turning any heads as a contending team, but they handled their business. And, Kyler looked good last week. And I think that was an excellent indication that, maybe it wasn't as much as Kyler was severely injured as much as it was they wanted him 100% and ready to go for the playoffs. And I think that's what we're seeing. And I think maybe they wanted to bring him back one game ahead of this matchup against the Rams to really highlight and target the importance of this Monday night game against the Rams. I think it's a big game for the Cardinals. They want to win this game to solidify, the number 1 seed in the NFC, at least, the number 1 spot in the NFC West division. And I think they're going to go in and handle their business at home next week. I think the Cardinals are a team that's going to dominate the Rams.
Yep. Completely agree.
All right. Let's highlight some of our DFS values of the week. Do we want to go over our lineups that we're submitting?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right. You want to kick it off?
Yes. So at quarterback, I have Taysom Hill. He has an awesome matchup against the New York Jets this week. So even with the mallet finger, I think I'd actually kind of prefer him because he has a mallet finger, because that means he's going to run the ball more.
Yeah.
Taysom running the ball just means fantasy points. It's just so much more impactful than passing the ball in terms of accruing fantasy points. He had 21 last week despite throwing 4 interceptions. It just shows you his potential in a smash matchup. 5,600, so he's just super cheap. That's why I love him there. At running back, I'm going with Austin Eckler. He's 8,300. Keenan Allen's likely going to miss the game due to COVID. So Austin Eckler should see just a funnel of receptions as well as carries. He's, I think, the highest priced running back on the week with Jonathan Taylor not playing, but I think he's well worth it. And I could spend up there because I don't have Taysom Hill in the lineup. The next guy is Alvin Kamara. So again, it's just a smash matchup. The pass catchers really aren't that good on the New Orleans Saints. I loved him against the Jets. I am going to be eating my lunch a little bit from both sides with Alvin Kamara and Taysom Hill in the same lineup, but I'm hoping that there's enough short screen passes. Taysom Hill's really not going to push the ball down the field. And with no Mark Ingram and Tony Jones Jr., I think was benched last week, they have no confidence in him really. So I think Kamara is just going to see every touch. Jamison Crowder is my wide receiver one's Mike Evans. I just have him in a different order. So Mike Evans, I think, is a fantastic matchup with Tre'Davious White out. He's 6,600, so a huge value. I think they want to get him going. Chris Godwin had a big week last week. I think it's Mike Evans' turn. My wide receiver 2 is Mike Williams. So still playing off of that idea that Keenan Allen being out, it's going to funnel a lot of targets to Mike Williams, especially those deeper targets, the red zone targets. So love him this week. And then Jamison Crowder, my wide receiver 3. With Elijah Moore out, Corey Davis out, you got to throw the ball to somebody. He's the most experienced wide receiver in that wide receiver core. I think he sees plenty of targets, and he's going to be very effective, especially in a lot of those 10-yard passes. Playing out of the slot means he's not going to see any Marshawn Lattimore too. So that seems to be where the Saints like to funnel passes, is those shorter passes to the slot. I like Jamison Crowder this week. And then at tight end, I have Austin Hooper. This is a value play based on David Njoku not being in the lineup. David Njoku was actually leading the Cleveland Browns in receiving yards up to this point in the season, which is a shock. But if you think about it, Jarvis Landry's missed a lot of time. Donovan Peoples-Jones is up and down. So really, Baker likes to look for these tight ends. With Harrison Bryant being out, as well as David Njoku, I think Austin Hooper should be really effective. Another way, if you want to go with it, is the Browns running backs. Obviously, they're going to see plenty of work. And then in my flex, I have Jeff Wilson Jr. So this, I don't think he's going to have a huge game, but it's more of a value play at 4,400. He should see, 10 to 15 carries. And for that price, I think he can certainly return 3x value on his dollars. And then I have Seattle D against Houston. Houston starting Davis Mills once again, which means plenty of interceptions. I really like Seattle D's chances at a turnover and possibly a touchdown.
I like it. It's a decent lineup. I would say I know I gave you a hard time with Taysom Hill, but the floor with him is just really high with the fact that he runs the ball so much. And for just 5,600, I think that's one of the better values. I don't see how he gets any points passing the football.
I don't think so either.
Yeah,
if he gets two rushing touchdowns and 80 yards rushing, I mean, there's 20 points, and that's all you need. So
for sure. And in a similar value, I'm trying to find some in a similar vein. I'm trying to find some value at the quarterback position. I'm gonna go with Jimmy Garoppolo at the quarterback spot. Garoppolo, like I said, I'm optimistic about the Niners actually winning this football game. I think their offense is going to perform well. They got Debo back. He has all of his offensive weapons aside from Elijah Mitchell, which I think is still probably good for Garoppolo because it means he's going to have to throw the football more. $5,800 for him. Jimmy G is facing off against the Bengals. The Bengals have allowed, they're right middle of the pack over the last 4 weeks in terms of fantasy points allowed to opposing quarterbacks. But I think this is a good matchup for Jimmy G. He's been, a little bit up and down this season, but his fantasy floor is actually pretty high, just based on the fact that their offense schemes up a lot of ways for him to get some easy, consistent throws. For just $5,800, I think I'm going with the safe play here with Jimmy G. Leonard Fournette, my RB1 spot. Like I said, Leonard Fournette fits that mold of the power rushers that have just been giving Buffalo a really tough time over the last several weeks. Buffalo over the last 4 weeks has allowed the second most fantasy points to opposing running backs. Their defense has, and I think we're going to see another great matchup here for Lenny Fournette. And like I said, the offense for the Bucks, I think, is going to gear towards him and his strengths this week, and I think Bucks really dominate that side of the football. We saw the Patriots really show that the Bills can get physically dominated on defense, and I think we're going to see the Bucks kind of take that template and maybe even do a better job at it. And I think Leonard Fournette's in for a good game this week. My RB2 spot, I'm going to go with Clyde Edwards-Helaire. Clyde, facing off against the Raiders defense. The Raiders have allowed the 4th most fantasy points to opposing running backs over the last 4 weeks. Raiders are 31st in EPA per play allowed over the last several weeks. They've been doing a really bad job on that side of the football with the defensive unit that started off really well in the year. They're not finishing strong. Max Crosby and Yannick Ngakoue are no longer, the dynamic duo that they initially looked like. I think Crosby is still excellent, but Ngakoue is not kind of that elite pass rusher and run stopper that we might have thought he was transforming into, probably settling into a more realistic role for him. Clyde Edwards-Helaire has looked pretty great since he returned from his mid-season injury, starting to take more and more of the work share away from Darrell Williams. Edwards-Helaire, I think, is starting to, round into that running back that the Chiefs thought they drafted in the first round a couple of years ago. And for just $6,100, I think he's one of the better values of the week. My wide receiver 1 spot, I'm going to go with CD Lamb, facing off against the Washington football team. Washington's secondary has been really struggling this season. They've been better over the last few weeks, but I think that we're going to start seeing this is going to be a matchup that, Dak is going to try to take the reins, I think, in this game. I think Dallas wants to win this game convincingly and make a statement performance against a divisional rival with the Washington football team. The football team has won, I think, 5 in a row now, at least 4. And I think we're going to see the Cowboys stick a fork in that win streak this week. I think that the Cowboys really want to make a statement win. I think it's going to start with their biggest playmaker on that side of the football, and CD Lamb. And Lamb is a dynamic pass catcher who is going to give the football team a lot of trouble. And the football team, the defense is just not there this season. And I think that is a great matchup for CD. I like his potential for a big breakout game this week as my wide receiver 1. My wide receiver 2, I'm going to go with Westbrook Ikine. I can't pronounce his last name. Ikine. Honestly, this is a play that I kind of pulled.
I think it's Westbrook Ikine.
Ikine.
Yeah.
And my thoughts here is, look, I know Julio's back, and I think we saw last week, the momentum for this passing game for the Titans is they're trying to find someone to help them out because they're really just thin on that side of the football. Julio coming back, I just don't trust Julio at all this season. I haven't seen anything dynamic out of him unless he's back 100% and he's shaking off all of his rust. I just don't see how Ikine isn't heavily involved in this passing game. And it's a good matchup for the Titans and their pass attack facing off against the Jaguars. A defense that you're not necessarily afraid to face. And he saw the most targets last week for the Titans. He's kind of the default number 1 guy for them. I with Julio back, I think it's just going to kind of take some of the attention and open up more space for Ikine. And $4,500, one of the most bargain values of the week here for a guy that I could see getting at least like 6 to 8 targets, some explosiveness from him. And I like the value there. Wide receiver 3, I'm going with Jalen Guyton. Guyton, we saw him become more involved over the last couple of weeks, and that was with Keenan Allen and Mike Williams in the lineup. I know Williams, got off the COVID list. He's playing. Guyton's going to be the number 2 guy here, and he's only $3,400. The Giants defense is not good. The secondary is really struggling to cover, passing games, and Guyton's only $3,400. He's going to see at least 5-6 targets. He's a deep ball threat. We saw him come down with a big touchdown last week, going up and catching it over the cornerback. And when Herbert had that cross field deep ball, I think in the air, it traveled like 65 plus yards, but it ended up being like a 30 or 40 yard touchdown. And, Herbert has that kind of strength, and Guyton has that kind of speed and physical ability to, help Herbert make the most of his abilities. I think for just $3,400, that's an excellent value on the week. And then my tight end spot, I'm going to go with the San Francisco 49ers stack. I'm going to go with George Kittle. saw Kittle break out in a big way last week. I think he had like 12 receptions, 150 plus yards,
Crazy
180
game.
plus yards, 2 touchdowns. That's the kind of potential we like out of George Kittle and what we expect out of George Kittle. And, facing off against Bengals, who the secondary has been slipping of late. Bengals are allowing the third most points to opposing tight ends over the last 4 weeks. So the tight ends have been carving up this Bengals defense over the last few weeks, last 4 weeks specifically. And I think that we're going to see another good game from Kittle. And 6,900, I think it's a good stack with Jimmy G there. In my flex, I'm going with, I think this is my favorite, value of the week. James Robinson facing off against the Tennessee Titans. The Titans aren't necessarily defense you want to go out and attack. They're doing okay against opposing running backs, but Robinson is going to be rostered in about 1 to 5% tops DFS lineups. And he's a guy that I think is going to be the number one weapon in Jacksonville's offense this week. We saw all the statements about Robinson wants to be more involved. Lawrence thinks Robinson's a beast and he should be playing. If Robinson doesn't get 25 touches in this game, Urban Meyer is in danger of losing his locker room completely.
Can you hear him yell at all the assistant coaches and make them defend why their resumes? He was blaming. He said, "I'm a winner. You guys are all losers. I've won my whole career. Jesus. We're losing, so it's your fault. Defend why you should have your job." And he did this to all the assistant coaches on the team.
Jesus.
What a toxic environment and what a bad coaching decision. What a bad coach.
Yeah, he is on the precipice of absolutely just there might be a mutiny in Jacksonville if he doesn't embrace James Robinson and help this team at the very least compete against the Titans this week.
What's the use of starting like a 31-year-old Carlos Hyde and giving him 10 carries, 15 carries at the
zero
detriment to James Robinson, a second-year player who's absolutely a beast, who's been playing awesome, who really helps this team? I don't get it.
Yeah, I think Robinson is going to have a big game. He has to, and he's only $5,800. I think he's an RB1 this week, and he's priced out like a bottom tier RB2.
Dude, you know what's crazy too? Kareem Hunt's 5,600. Just another guy in that same vein I wanted to bring up.
Definitely. I like Hunt. I think that's going to be a lower scoring game than this Jacksonville Tennessee game, and that's ultimately why I went with it. And we saw Hunt he maybe wasn't 100% in that first game back a couple weeks ago, and I want to see it. I want to see him, back on the field performing better. And he kind of finished that game with a leg injury. He picked up another injury at the end of the 2 weeks ago, so he might not still might not be 100%. So I like the value there. It's pretty cheap with the potential of a big game, but Hunt's someone that I want to see get more involved in the offense and show more health than what I've seen. I haven't seen him, operate at full capacity in the last, 6 weeks, 7 weeks. So it's been a while since we've seen Hunt. So finishing out my roster, I got the defense, and I'm going to go with the Carolina Panthers facing off against the Atlanta Falcons. I want to be targeting the Falcons as often as I can over the rest of the season in DFS. This offense for the Falcons is allowing an astronomical amount of points to opposing defenses in fantasy. Like I said, last 4 weeks, Falcons are averaging 15.75 points allowed to opposing defenses. And then that's 3.75 points more than the next worst team. So the Falcons are an offense to target right now in fantasy. The Panthers should be a top 5 defense in DFS, in my opinion. I think they're priced right around the middle. And
like 2,800, right?
Yeah, only 2,800 for a Panthers D. That they're coming off the bye. We've seen unders, hit at unders are hitting over 70% this year for teams coming off a bye, and that's a trend that I've been monitoring. We've been monitoring all year long, and the scoring for teams coming off a bye is not high, and that bodes well for the defense here. The Panthers, coming off the bye, I think that we're going to see them really just get a lot of points here against the Falcons. That's one of my favorite values of the week. All right. That's going to do it for our lineups here. Again, Jimmy G, Lenny Fournette, Clyde Edwards-Helaire, CeeDee Lamb. I think it's Nikhil Westbrook-Ikine, right? Jalen Guyton, George Kittle, James Robinson, and the Panthers D.
Me, it's Taysom Hill, Austin Eckler, Alvin Kamara, Jamison Crowder, Mike Evans, Mike Williams, Austin Hooper, Jeff Wilson Jr., Seattle.
All right, Connor, we're 4 minutes away from kickoff. We, went through a gauntlet of topics here heading into week 14. We're going to try to get back on our grind next week. It's just like we said on the kickoff. It's been a busy few weeks, holiday season, work picking up, family things. I got sick a couple weeks ago. My voice is still not 100% there. I'm feeling it towards the end here now. I'm getting real raspy, and but we're gonna keep it going next week. And I think that our handicapping and our advice is still holding true towards a lot of good analysis, and we're finishing the season strong.
Oh yeah, and great luck to everybody out there this last week, or for most I would say most regular leagues. This is the last week of your fantasy season, so good luck out there. Hopefully, you make the playoffs.
Well said.
And take our roster advice in the last 3 minutes. Make sure you double check everything and get it done.
Definitely. All right, Connor, that's gonna do it here. Kind of like Vicious Talk with Benny P, but more like all things analysis, YouTube, Vicious Talk crossover, and
VT Live, baby, VT Live.
And that's gonna do it. Episode, whatever that was, YouTube episode. And Connor, remember to tell our listeners that we're still offering. Nobody's taking up us on the offer. You give us a DM at All Things Analysis on our Instagram. Show us a 5-star rating, and we will give you. Connor will send you some free shit,
free shirt or free hat, whatever one you pick.
Anything you want.
Free car.
Connor will give you the deed to his house, and
we'll give you some ownership in the company.
Oh man, nobody's taking us up on that. It's so funny, man.
They don't like our designs.
Yeah, right. Subscribe, rate, review Vicious Talk with Benny P. We really appreciate all the support, and good luck, like Connor said, to everybody in their fantasy football endeavors this week. Go and make those playoffs, everybody, and enjoy week 14. All right.
That'll wrap it. I'm going to end the video. Thanks, Benny.
Hold on. Don't forget to ask yourself at the end of the day, are you vicious?